Let's see here. Share screen. Okay, I apologize if yesterday I couldn't hear you. There was probably something again wrong with, not with my microphone, but that time with my speaker. So sorry about that. Would everyone like to test their mic to make sure that you are heard? Paul, would you like to try?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me now, Rabbi?
Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay, yeah. Perfectly. Thank you. Now
like,
I just have to think of something wise to say.
Okay, wise enough. All right. So yesterday we saw in the Likutim that he quoted the Sefer Pischei Choshen from Rav Blau, who was a major posek in Yerushalayim in the late 20th century. Whether or not a person has a right to open up a shtibel in his basement, and that's going to affect the foot traffic and going to affect the noise factors for the neighbors. So is that halachically justifiable? And so you know that this is based on this statement quoted from the Shulchan Aruch, that Ein hashchenim yecholim la'akev milalamed tinokot shel Yisrael Torah b'toch beito, that neighbors cannot protest if a person is teaching children Torah in his house. And as the Pischei Choshen writes, he quotes the Aruch HaShulchan, that afilu osa bischar, even if he's getting compensated for it. In other words, that does not in any way demote the fact that he's doing an important mitzvah, that you can't protest. The al kol panim ha-mitzvah naaseit, because at the end of the day, the mitzvah is being done, even if he's being paid for it. And then the last thing is, quoted by the Shulchan Aruch, is v'chein l'chol dvar mitzvah einam yecholim limchaz. And for any mitzvah, the neighbors cannot protest. So this is, this has could have very generic arguments. It could have very sweeping ramifications depending upon how you define a mitzvah. So. If you take a look at can everyone see the screen? If you take a look at Rav Bloy's commentary in the Pischei Choshen, he says, "Uveseif Aleph be'umna she'acholim la'akev." That if you take a look in Sif Aleph in the Shulchan Aruch, you'll see the things that you are allowed to stop a person from opening up. Mana, Rofei, O Uman. So enumerated in that list is if a person is a doctor and he's getting foot traffic coming into his home because he set up a clinic in his home. That is not considered a mitzvah. Isn't that interesting? O uman, or a bloodletter. O gardi, or someone who is, just remind myself, I think that's a tanner or a sort of person who works with leather, if I'm not mistaken. Hold on one sec. See, Hebrew. I don't even know whether that term even exists in modern. A weaver is a gardi.
Yeah, that's better because a tanner is supposed to be very stinky, isn't it?
Yeah. No, it's not. It's not a tanner. It's a weaver. O sofer shtarot, or a scribe, who his profession is to. This is before the printing press, to draw up contracts and legal documents. O melamed tinokot limud she'eino shel Torah, or to teach children topics that are not Torah topics. Let's say I set up a school in my, I want to set up a Montessori school, right? And that was where Rav Stern had written that even if you set up a preschool and you're just teaching them to say Shema Yisrael, that's sufficient. But if you're just exclusively teaching them secular subjects or non-Torah subjects, then that's not something that you can force upon the neighbors. So if you're, let's say, teaching them a trade, And then the Beit Yosef, he quotes, brings a machlokes for in regard to a teacher, whether you can stop a teacher. Shalarashi in Melamed Kol Bnei Ha'ir Umoshiv Melamdim Tachtav Yecholim La'akev Mipnei Shuhu Kol Gadol. That according to Rashi, whose commentary appears in the Gemara, if he's teaching the entire community and he is setting up other teachers in his home, so it's created a huge sort of enterprise in his home, so then the neighbors can shut it down because this is creating a large noise. And according to Rashi's opinion, even if a person is teaching Torah, if he wants to set up a school instead of just one classroom, so then that's going to be a problem. And the Haramban mefarish b'shitat Rashi, the dafka b'melamed l'melamdim aser, aval melamed tinokos afilo harbi muter mipnei takonas Yehoshua ben Gamla. But the Ramban qualifies Rashi, and he says that even within Rashi's commentary, it's only problematic if I'm teaching other teachers. But if I'm teaching students, even if I'm teaching a huge number of students in my home, in multiple classrooms, it's okay because of what's called the Takanas Yehoshua ben Gamla. Yehoshua ben Gamla set up the first yeshiva school system. And the Gemara, the Mishnah actually talks about Yehoshua ben Gamla, about how he was able to save education and set up the whole educational system within Klal Yisrael in the times of the Mishnah. Now, the Hizbir Habeit Yosef, the Svir Leila Haramban, the Bechol Midi, the Mitzvah Yochol La'ake, V'rak B'malame Tinokos, Mishum Takanos Yehoshua ben Gamla. So according to the Ramban, the only time that neighbors cannot protest is specifically when it comes to teaching children, because of a special sort of takana, a special institution that the rabbis placed on the importance of education, but not for other mitzvahs. If a person is, let's say, selling lulavim and esrogim from his house, that's not the same thing as teaching children. But if there's another kind of mitzvah that I'm engaged in that's creating foot traffic, etc., and I can easily do it somewhere else, according to the Ramban, then there's no reason for the neighbors not to protest. They have every right to protest. But then the Beit Yosef brings other opinions. He brings the opinion of Rabbeinu Yerucham, he brings the opinion of the Torah, that for any mitzvah, the neighbors cannot protest. And even if a person is just a scribe who's writing svarim, in other words, or I'm printing svarim for people and they come to want to pick up svarim from my house, I sell Judaica, no one can protest, even though I'm creating more foot traffic and noise. Or let's say I set up a charity organization where people come lined up, let's say every evening, I set up a soup kitchen, or I set up a charity organization in my house, and the neighbors are getting annoyed because the poor people are coming and they're making noise outside while they're waiting online. You can't say anything according to this opinion because it's a mitzvah. Or people gather in this person's home because they want to daven with a minyan. You can't say anything according to this opinion because it's for a mitzvah. V'chein kasav b'shem haritva shemuter lasos medrash laharbitz Torah o lidrosh l'rabim. And the Ritva writes the same thing, that if you want to set up a base medrash in your house to spread Torah knowledge or to expound on the Torah publicly and to give a drasha in your home, that's the neighbors cannot protest. And okay, and he quotes all of these other people who say that synagogue is included. Now the Sma, who's a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, says that the Levush, who's another commentary, says that even if a person, the word rofei is a doctor. We said you're allowed to protest the doctor. And according to the Levush, even if the doctor performs circumcisions, ritual circumcisions, you're allowed to protest if it's creating too much foot traffic. Okay? And Shaharei Midi de Mitzvahu, Ve'alkein Piresh Rofei Mamash. And the Sma says, I disagree, because if a person is a moil, then he's doing a mitzvah, and therefore you cannot protest. So, therefore, the Sma disagrees with the Levush, and he says the only person that you're allowed to protest is an actual physician who is healing sick people. That's not under the rubric of mitzvah, surprisingly enough.
I was just going to ask, Rabbi, I mean, isn't to save a life or less than that to heal a mitzvah?
I would imagine so, but perhaps maybe we're talking about a person who provides therapy to alleviate perhaps certain illnesses which are not life-threatening. That's the only thing that I can think of. But he says, V'hiksha hataz the hagam refuah midi de mitzvahu. But now let's take a look. The Taz asks Paul's question. He says, but one second, healing people from their sicknesses is also a mitzvah. V'alkein meforesh hataz, shelo hitiru b'midi de mitzvah, ela b'davar shetzarich la'asot b'tziruf anashim etzlo. So the Taz says that no, it's not any mitzvah. It's only mitzvot where an assembly of people are required. That's where the neighbors cannot protest. Kigon lechalek tzedakah u'litbalel ba'asara, such as giving out tzedakah. By the very definition, if I say I'm setting up a soup kitchen, right, in my house, then the people have to come to me to get the soup. I can't start schlepping soup all over town. It's not going to work. So therefore, people have to assemble, and there's going to perforce be extra foot traffic. Or let's say I want to set up a minyan. You need an assembly of people to create a minyan. But a doctor, a moil, you can make house calls. He can go to them. Why do they have to come to his house and create all this noise? So therefore, that's the difference according to the Taz. But that's difficult to understand, says Rav Blau. He says, because why can't you say the same thing about a scribe? Why is a scribe someone that you cannot protest if he can easily go to someone else's house? It could be because he's got all of his apparatus in his house. And I refer you to the Aruch HaShulchan and the Sefer Mishkanos Yisrael. And then he quotes the Chasam Sofer, and he says the Chasam Sofer says that Shelo hitiru b'midi de mitzvah kim b'mitzvah mutelat al hatzibur. The only time that we cannot protest a mitzvah, that a mitzvah is given a free pass, is if it's a communal activity. Communal activity. The lichora medivrei haposkim delei lo mashma kain, but the other poskim don't seem to confine it to that. And then there's another argument that the Chasam Sofer makes, and he says, anything that I do to support my family is a mitzvah. So if I need to make a parnasa by doing any kind of menial labor, then aren't I doing a mitzvah by supporting my family? The chazer v'kasav lechalek bein mitzvah mutelat al hakol kigon tashbar v'chayotze bazeh aval parnasa mutelas alav v'lo al shcheino v'nira midvarav sham delo psikalei haisvara v'tzarchim. And it seems that at the end of his responsum, the Chasam Sofer equivocates, and he's not really sure how to quantify this issue of doing a mitzvah. So that's an unresolved issue. And then he says, Kasav b'pischei tshuva, b'shem halavush, shelo amru shein yicholem la'akev b'milah d'mitzvah ela b'chatzer. He says the only time that the argument, the defense of I'm doing a mitzvah so you cannot stop me, is only when you're dealing with neighbors who share a courtyard. Aval shnayim shedorim yachad b'cheder echad yochol limchot afilu b'malame tinokot shavadai ein rov ha'olam sovlo ve'al derech kein lo nishtatfu. But let's say we're roommates in the same apartment. Then you cannot say, oh, I after you guys have already moved in and are living together, I've decided to start a new business. It involves bringing 30 children into the apartment every single day and teaching them Torah. So that is not a defense. It's only when you're separate, living in separate apartments or separate homes and you're sharing a courtyard. But if you're mamish roommates in the same house or the same apartment, so then that defense doesn't work. And then he writes that which the Rav Stern had quoted him, where he says, "V'yesh lihi stapek." Oh, I'm sorry. It'll be the next paragraph. Al pi ma shekasav harama le'el she'af b'dvarim she'enim yacholem limchos and hu chola yachol limchos im b'midi demitzvah yachol chola limchos. One of the questions that we can attach to what we learned in the previous sif is, we know that if a person is ill, he has a right to protest the noise that a neighbor is making, even, let's say, more so than a healthy person, right? And we said, there's conflicting interests. One is the needs of the sick person versus the rights of the individual to perform regular daily activities. What if this person is bringing in extra added foot traffic and creating noise, and the neighbor claims that I'm sick, and this is causing me to have my illness exacerbated? So we know that special allowances are made for a person who gets migraines or gets sick from smoke and vibrations and other things like that. So he says, so where does this come in? Who in the hierarchy? Who has priority? The sick person or the person who's doing a mitzvah like teaching children? V'ayin ma shekasav v'schei tshuva dinei geneva va'ona shuva isi v'salmas chayim shegam choyle einu yachol limchos b'tinoko shel beis rabban. And he says, I noted in a sefer called Salmat Chayim that even a sick person cannot protest a person who wishes to teach children, because so great is the mitzvah of Talmud Torah to children. And then he finishes off by saying that which we saw him quoted as, Uchvar nistapakti im yachol la'akev milasot beit hakneset tachat beito. And I have the following doubt, which is the following safek, that I'm pondering, is a person permitted to make a shtibel in his basement? Uvaofen shal yedei zeh yihiyeh asur ladur beveito misvara nira sheyachol la'akev. He says, if it creates a situation where it prohibits a neighbor from living in his house, because now that he's created a synagogue, the neighbor is not able to engage in certain activities if he lives right above where the shtibel is. He hears the sound of brachos and everything, and he can't go to the bathroom or do anything like that. So he says, then for sure you can stop him, right? That would be only logical. He says, because the only thing that you cannot stop a person from doing is doing a mitzvah which is going to create a little bit of extra noise or foot traffic. But if it's going to make it impossible for you to live normally in your home, so then for sure you can prevent it. Elamashani stapakti al pi divrei hataz she machmir b'dira sheme'al beit hakneset afilu b'ofen shemedina shari im yachol hashachen la'akev mipnei chumra. Can the neighbor stop you from doing that mipnei chumra? And it's not really clear what he means by that, but he quotes a Taz from Orach Chaim Siman Kuf Nun Aleph Sifkat and Daled, which deals with the laws of a Beis HaKnesses. And I'm not really sure. Shemachmir b'dira sheme'al Beis HaKnesses afilu ba'ofen shemedina shari. The Taz apparently feels that it's not proper for a neighbor to live above a synagogue. And even though halachically it's permissible, the Taz says that a person should be machmir to not live on top of a synagogue. And what if the neighbor is disturbed by that? He says, okay, so the guy who set up the shtibel says, but it's halachically it's okay. The guy says, I know halachically, I just don't feel comfortable. So let's say you set up the party room in the conservatory as your shtibel, and a guy lives mamash right above that party room. He can't hear the noise, right? But he feels uncomfortable. His bathroom is right above that shul, that room. So can he say, I'm not happy with this? This is making my life very uncomfortable, and I protest. So that's what he said. That's where he says that it's really unclear in the halacha who has the right, whether the neighbor has the right to make a protestation or not.
Sorry,
So,
the neighbor's concern is that he's desecrating somehow by being put in this position?
Right, being put in this position, yeah.
Right. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Let's see, there's something else I wanted to show you.
And I presume, Rabbi, that's based on order as well. Like he can't move in and then tell the shul to leave. Like it's only if this shul's created after he's been there.
Correct. Yes, I think that's a fair assumption, right? Okay, so we don't have resolution on this matter because remember, the definition of what a mitzvah is has multiple definitions. According to the Chasam Sofer, it's anything that is required for a communal assembly. That's something that I cannot stop. But if it's something that a guy could go do somewhere else and make a house call to the individual that he's serving, even if he's serving them by helping them do a mitzvah, that I can stop, but then there are others who disagree. And it's quite, you could reduce anything to performance of a mitzvah ad absurdum, right? Guy says, I need to support my family, so I need to, sell widgets from my house, and I'm doing a mitzvah. Because how am I supposed to, my kid needs to I got to pay for my kid's tuition. So isn't that a mitzvah, right? So the applications are very vague, and this would probably have to go to a beis din, and they would have to try to create some kind of compromise. But certainly, let's say if a person, here's where we get into like the really practical issues. A fellow that lives next door to me says, I'm setting up X. And I say, I'm not happy about that. You're creating all of this traffic. All of these people are coming to your house at all different times of day and night. I'm not happy. And the guy says, well, I'm sorry, it's a mitzvah. I've decided I'm going to be selling lulavim and esrogim from my house. And I say, I don't want that. And he says, well, it's too bad, I'm doing a mitzvah. And I'm allowed to, you can't protest if it's for the sake of a mitzvah. So I say, but 1 second, the Chasam Sofer doesn't say that. And it's only for Tinokos Shel Beis Rabban, according to the Ramban, right? It's not for all other mitzvahs. So so he says, well, too bad, I paskin like the other people. So now here's the shaila. Can I, as an irate neighbor, go and report him to the municipality that he's operating a business without a license from his home to get him shut down? It's a great question, right? Because that's really where the practical issue is going to come in. I assume that in many municipalities, you need a license in order to operate a retail business from your home, correct? Right? So let's say this guy doesn't have a license. And then so I say to him, listen, if you don't stop this and rent a space from the shul down the road or rent a retail space to sell your lulavim and esrogim, I'm going to report you. And he says, you are going to be a musser, and you're the vilest person in the world, if a person who's a musser. So my response to that would be, that's not so clear that he's doing anything wrong. He's paskening like the Ramban, who says that a person does not have a right to set up noise and added foot traffic in his house, if it's going to disturb the neighbor. And the only exception is for teaching children. And there is no other exception. So if you're selling lulavim and esrogim, and people are coming to you till 11 o'clock at night, and it's bothering me, I do have a right to protest. You want to paskin like someone, so I paskin like the Ramban, and according to the Ramban, I can shut you down if you refuse to comply. So what's wrong? I'm just calling the authorities to shut you down and to have you abide by what I paskin the halacha to be. They're not going to throw you in jail. They'll just tell you, shut down your business or we'll give you a fine, right? So this argument, oh, you'll be a musser, that's absurd. It's not a valid argument. So I just want to
It's interesting because I know a situation where, I mean, I've used the service offered, and it's not just a short-term 1 or 2 weeks a year sukkahs thing. The service provider says, don't park right outside my house because, there'll be complaints or whatever. But I mean, obviously, there's a concern there that operating a business at their house with people coming all the time could be a problem, right?
I have a problem in general with people who opened up businesses in their basements against the law. Against the law. Now, in certain cities, we're not going to discuss Toronto, but in certain cities, in the religious community, it's standard, right? You go to you want to buy something. I got a friend who's got a friend. Go down to that address at this hour in the basement, and you can buy whatever you want. And they take cash only, no sales tax, yada yada yada. Right? Okay, come on. We're learning
how the rabbi feels about that issue.
We're learning Choshen Mishpat, right? We've learned already that Dina de Malchus Dina, but certainly with financial issues, the law of the land is the law. So, so I don't think that it's appropriate, Paul, if a guy is running a business out of his house, even if the neighbors are not protesting, but he's in clear violation of the law, that's not right. That's not right. And I don't think, I think that on a short-term basis, one could perhaps justify patronizing this guy, but as a regular customer, I would feel very uncomfortable.
Rabbi, what about the shuls that are opening in the there's various shtibel type shuls that open throughout the city here in the Thornhill and down south, and there's bringing in a lot of traffic into the area. Sometimes neighbors are quite upset, but it seems that the municipalities are not shutting them down, and they're aware of it.
Right. The municipalities are looking the other way. There was a case that many of us are aware of where a member of our shul was unhappy that a guy had gutted a house in our neighborhood and converted it into a shul. He didn't like the extra cars that were parked on his block. He couldn't park in front of his house. It was really a legitimate nuisance that was being created on his block. And so he reported him to the authorities. And when I was asked whether this is being a musur, I said, no, it's not. I said, if the guy, if it's one thing if a guy if he's licensed to open up a shul and it's perfectly legal, so then there may be an issue of what we're discussing here. But if this is in clear contravention of the city code, of the zoning laws, and he's creating a nuisance, and then you do have a right to protest. So remember, all of what we're learning here is when a person has a legal right to open a shtibel in his house, and it's not going against any zoning laws, but if it's a clear violation of zoning, so then I think you do have a right to protest and report him to the municipality. Now, so you have to make a distinction between shtibels that are set up, let's say in a strip mall, in a shopping area. The guy sets up a storefront where he opens up a shul. What's wrong with that? He's not creating a nuisance in the neighborhood. He's just setting up a new shul. And what? So you're worried that maybe people will stop coming to your shul? That's the rule. That's the nature of the business. In the shul business, people open up shuls all the time, and there's nothing you can really do about it. The only issue is neighbors do have a right to say, I value my quality of life, and I don't want my quality of life compromised just because you're an Orthodox Jew and you want to set up a shul in your house and it's creating a nuisance. It's one thing to say that I cannot stop you because you're doing a mitzvah, right? But again, it's a whole suffix whether that's enough of a justification for a shul, which is not teaching children Torah, but it's allowing people to daven. So there's a whole machlokus here. That's why there's a suffix. So if I choose to paskin that you're not allowed to, I have a right to paskin that way. And it's especially true if you're in violation of the zoning law, of the code, that's the city code. Okay.
This is a problem with backyard minions as well, potentially.
Potentially, right? I think people during COVID should be a little bit more compassionate. That's my personal feeling, to allow people to have backyard minyanim, but I still would not condemn someone as being a musser if they see people in the height of COVID davening in their backyard and it makes them apprehensive, especially if they're not masked or whatever. Okay.
Even in more normal times, Friday night minions in people's houses, which was common.
Yeah, Friday night minyanim. It depends on the situation, right? Okay, have a wonderful